Deep within the emerald expanse of the Amazon rainforest, a world away from the noise of the 21st century, the last chapters of a uniquely human story are being written. From the cockpit of a low-flying aircraft, the canopy below appears as an unbroken sea of green. Then, a sudden rupture in the foliage reveals a clearing, and figures emerge, their bodies painted in red and black pigments. In their hands they hold not gestures of welcome, but longbows, arrows drawn and aimed at the metal bird intruding upon their sovereignty. These are the Amazon's last uncontacted peoples, but to call them lost tribes is a sensationalist myth that obscures a more urgent truth. These groups are acutely aware of the outside world. Their isolation is not a state of ignorance, but a deliberate, active, and ongoing choice, a survival strategy forged in a history of trauma. They're more accurately referred to as slow peoples and voluntary isolation. Their world and ours meet at a fragile boundary. The survival of these communities hangs by the slenderest of threads, threatened by the relentless encroachment of an outside world hungry for the resources buried beneath their ancestral lands. Their fate is not just an anthropological curiosity, it is a barometer for the health of the Amazon itself, and ultimately a test of our own humanity. How did an entire people come to reject the modern world? And what happens when that final fragile boundary is inevitably broken? This is a story of thresholds, the perilous moment of first contact, and the irreversible finality of the last goodbye. To comprehend their fierce determination to remain apart, one must look not to a primordial past, but to a history written in blood, fear, and betrayal. Their self-imposed quarantine is a direct and rational response to centuries of violence. While violence began with the first European incursions, no single event was more cataclysmic than the Amazon rubber boom of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. As global demand for rubber exploded, violent entrepreneurs such as the notorious rubber baron Carlos Fitzcarrald carved out vast rainforest empires powered by indigenous slave labor. Entire communities were chained, flogged, and worked to death in the rubber camps. The only hope for survival was to escape. Communities abandoned their settled agricultural lives and retreated to the remote, inaccessible headwaters of the forest. This flight, this desperate choice to hide, would define their descendants' relationship with the outside world for the next century. This pattern of genocidal violence never truly ended. As Brazil pursued aggressive Amazonian integration in the mid-20th century, massive highways were bulldozed through territories. The subsequent wave of loggers and ranchers saw indigenous inhabitants as obstacles to be removed. The fate of the Akansu tribe is a chilling example. When agents from FUNAI, Brazil's indigenous affairs agency, contacted them in 1995, they found only a handful of survivors. The tribe had been systematically murdered by cattle ranchers and their houses bulldozed to erase all evidence of their existence. One survivor, a man named Pupak, still carried lead shot in his back from the gunmen who had hunted his family. Their isolation, therefore, is not a cultural quirk. It is a shield built from the memory of massacre. Their hostility is not innate savagery. It is the learned behavior of a people who know that outsiders often arrive with guns.
Today, the isolation of these peoples is under an unprecedented and intensifying assault. It is a multi-front war driven by the relentless global demand for natural resources. A 2025 report paints a grim picture. Extractive industries threaten more than 96% of all uncontacted groups. The most pervasive threat is illegal logging, endangering an estimated 65% of these peoples. Loggers destroy the ecosystem and scare away the game animals that tribes depend on. The increased sightings of the Mashco-Piro in Peru, for example, are directly correlated with the advance of logging operations, which push them towards settled areas in search of safety and food. The Mashco-Piro fight back, having killed loggers who entered their territory in bow and arrow attacks, a clear signal of their determination to defend their land. Even more toxic is illegal mining, affecting over 40% of groups. Tens of thousands of illegal gold miners, or garimperos, swarm indigenous lands, using vast quantities of mercury. This mercury pours into the rivers, poisoning the water and the fish, leading to developmental problems in children and outbreaks of disease. The stagnant pools left behind become breeding grounds for mosquitoes, triggering explosive outbreaks of malaria. But the greatest killer remains the invisible one: disease. Having lived in isolation for generations, uncontacted peoples have no acquired immunity to common viruses. For them, influenza, measles, or even a common cold can be as lethal as a bullet. The historical record is a grim catalog of disasters. It is not unusual for 50% or more of a tribe's population to be wiped out within the first year of sustained contact. When the Muru-Nahua of Peru were forcibly contacted by loggers, a survivor recounted, "Half of us died. My aunt died, my nephew died. Half of my people died." This extreme vulnerability is why the policy of no contact is not a preference, it is a matter of life and death. The moment of first contact is a threshold between worlds, fraught with misunderstanding, fear, and immense risk. These encounters can be a lifeline from imminent danger or the beginning of a swift demographic collapse. In Brazil's vast Vale do Javari indigenous territory, the 1996 contact with a group of Corubo people presented an agonizing dilemma. The group had unknowingly migrated into an area aggressively invaded by armed loggers. To adhere strictly to the no-contact policy would be to stand by and watch them be massacred. The legendary sertanista Sidney Pozuelo made the difficult decision that a controlled, planned contact was the only way to save them. After months of patiently leaving gifts and making their presence known in a non-threatening manner, Corubo warriors emerged to meet the Funai team. Crucially, due to careful preparation and immediate medical support, no one from the Corubo group died from diseases introduced during the contact. This stands as a rare example of a necessary and successfully managed intervention. But the story of the Awa people is a stark contrast. Often called Earth's most endangered tribe, their tragedy began not with a rescue mission, but with a massive industrial project: the construction of a 900-kilometer railway to exploit an iron ore deposit. This railway sliced directly through the heart of Awa territory. The official policy was to contact and settle the Awa, clearing the way for development. The consequences were catastrophic. In one Awa community of 91 people, only 25 survived the initial outbreaks of malaria and influenza that swept through them within 4 years of contact. The Awa were forced to abandon their nomadic existence. Years later, a member of the Awa, Wamaksua, reflected simply that they had a good life before moving out of the forest. His words are a haunting epitaph for a culture devastated by forced integration in the name of progress.
Beyond the fraught dynamics of first contact lies a deeper, more absolute tragedy: the final goodbye. The story of the man of the whole is the most poignant and complete account of such an extinction. In the Brazilian state of Rondônia, this man lived utterly alone for 26 years. His real name is unknown. The language he spoke died with him. He was not a hermit by choice. He was the sole survivor of a genocide.
His entire small tribe was annihilated by gunmen hired by ranchers and miners in a series of attacks, culminating in 1995. His solitude was not a cultural practice, but a sentence imposed upon him by the outside world. For over 2.5 decades, FUNAI agents monitored his territory, finding evidence of his resilience. He built over 50 straw huts, cultivated small gardens of maize and manioc, and hunted forest animals. His nickname came from a mysterious, singular practice. In the center of each hut, he dug a deep, narrow hole, often over 1.8 meters deep. The purpose of these pits remains an enigma. They may have been for trapping animals, or perhaps more tragically, hiding places in case of attack, a plausible theory since he survived an attack by gunmen in 2009. Others suggest a lost spiritual significance. The end came in August 2022. A FUNAI agent found him dead in a hammock in his final hut. He was estimated to be around 60 years old, but the most striking detail was his final posture. He was adorned with the bright, iridescent feathers of a macaw. It was as if he had known his end was near and had performed one last ceremony to prepare himself for death. His death marked the first officially recorded extinction of an uncontacted tribe in Brazil in recent history. His passing was the quiet, lonely conclusion to a violent, decades-long crime. As one advocate noted, with his death, the genocide of his people is complete. His lonely end serves as a haunting symbol of the fate awaiting other critically endangered groups, such as the 5 remaining Akuntsu individuals. As the last isolated peoples face an existential crisis, a complex battle for their future is being waged. The cornerstone of modern protection efforts is the Brazilian government's hard-won no-contact policy. This policy, championed by figures like Sidney Pozuelo, determined that contact was a lie and a deception that annihilated culture. The strategy is simple: confirm the group's presence, demarcate their lands as legally protected territories, and prevent all incursions. Today, this landmark policy is under severe political attack by mining and agribusiness lobbies. But the fight is not being lost by governments alone. It is being won by indigenous allies on the ground. Organizations support contacted groups like the Massacres in Peru, who monitor their vast ancestral territory, acting as critical buffer zones to shield their uncontacted neighbors deeper in the forest. Their extreme vulnerability has sparked a profound ethical debate. Advocates argue that their isolation is a fundamental human right rooted in their history of trauma, and that to force contact is a gross violation of self-determination. Conversely, some argue that because they are constantly threatened by violent frontier elements, a carefully planned, controlled contact with medical teams is the only humane way to save them. However compelling the theory, the historical record provides a brutal rebuttal. The risks are too immense, and the potential for disaster is catastrophic. The prevailing view remains clear. The only ethical path is to protect their lands absolutely and let them decide if, when, and how they choose to make contact. The fate of the Amazon's last uncontacted peoples is not a marginal issue. The siege on their lands is a microcosm of the wider war on the Amazon. The same forces that push tribes to the brink of extinction are driving the rainforest itself towards a catastrophic tipping point. Scientists warn that when 20 to 25% of the forest is destroyed, the Amazon could begin an irreversible transition into a drier, savanna-like ecosystem. Protecting the vast, intact territories of uncontacted peoples, therefore, is one of the most effective strategies for protecting the entire biome. Their lands are the vital, beating heart of the forest. Their disappearance would be the erasure of millennia of human knowledge, unique languages, and a crucial part of our shared human heritage. The last goodbyes are not yet written. We can be the generation that stands by and allows the last free peoples of the Amazon to be wiped from the earth. Or we can be the generation that decides their world and the forest they protect is worth saving.